Hello everyone and welcome to episode 14 of my Topical Ramble series, and in this video I'm going to answer a couple of questions that was put forward from my last Topical Ramble. If you recall, I did throw it out there if people had anything that they wanted me to talk about, to pop a question or comment in the comments section and I'll address it in the next Topical Ramble that I do. The intention of course is just to try to give me some topics to talk about rather than me have these huge pauses between Topical Rambles while I try to suss out what I'm going to do. So I had a couple of responses, so thank you very much for that, guys. And the first one I got was from Chazni. I hope I've said that right. I do get quite a few comments off this person, and the comment was basically about music in video games, sound and music in video games. And Chazni went on to mention that they have a home theatre setup and how it gives superior sound. It really enhances the game audio and takes it to the next level, especially over headphones. I don't have a home theatre setup, so most of my stuff comes through the television, although I do use headphones when I live stream, and I do notice quite a considerable difference. The problem that I have is when I game in quite a small room, and so a lot of audio coming from the television can be a bit overwhelming, especially if I had something like a soundbar. A surround sound in here is just not practical. I'd go deaf within the hour. And although I really do love game music and game audio, sometimes I think when you play a lot of games that are sandbox games, the audio can get quite repetitive sometimes. So I do tend to, when I'm playing a lot of sandbox games, once I've sort of got a general feel for the audio, I tend to lower the audio and stick a podcast on or stick a YouTube video on to listen to. So for me it's a bit of a contrast, but game audio is important. I can think of, just going down through the years, many times that game audio has almost lifted an average game for me into something that I enjoyed playing just so I could listen to the audio. I first really came across this back in the 80s playing on the Commodore 64. That computer had the best sound chip of the 8-bit computers around at that time for me. It had a SID chip, and it enabled it to produce some really amazing sounds that even today is used by some musicians. And even though obviously it's an 8-bit it's an 8-bit computer, and it's got a limited number of channels. I think it had 3-4 audio channels, so it was quite limited. Really good musicians could make the Commodore 64 really sing. Guys like Martin Galway, Rob Hubbard, I think it's Jerome Tell, I think that's how you say his name. He was from the Maniacs of Noise anyway. These guys really transformed audio for me in video games, because they took what was essentially sort of the beepy, blippy, scratchy, tinny sort of sounds and actually created musical pieces from them. I can think of stuff like the main music to Delta, for example, was fantastic. The Maniacs of Noise did the intro to Turbo Outrun that even had sampled speech in it, which back in the 80s was a real rarity. Speech in computer games was a big thing back then. You take it for granted now because games are talking to you all the time, but back then it was a scarcity. And to actually have it wasn't quite singing, but there was certainly audio in there. You could hear the guy's voice sort of rapping a little bit on the intro to it, and they're using a lot of sampled instruments on a Commodore 64. It was like, this is incredible. And I remember just playing the game just so I could hear that intro when it loaded up. There was loads. It was so amazing to hear. Like, if you go to the Commodore 64 early on and you heard the sounds that were coming out of it, and hear the sounds that people bring out of it now, people that do these demos and stuff like that, it's incredible. You wouldn't think it was the same machine. And yeah, it was a great thing. And of course, I went from that to the 16-bit generation, and of course the sound went up. And again, I had a computer. The computer I had after the Commodore 64 was the Commodore Amiga, and again, the audio on that was just out of this world. You know, people that have played stuff like Xenon 2, people that have played like Cannon Fodder. Cannon Fodder has a song that plays at the beginning with people singing. The same with Sensible Soccer. You know, it was just weird. You know, because again, this was before CD-ROM technology, so even though there was a big quantum leap with game audio that happened in the 90s when CD-ROMs came out, because games were just spooling audio off CDs, so essentially it was like real music. You know, the audio went to the next level. Back then it was all coming off, you know, it was being loaded into the system memory from a floppy disk or a cassette. It was incredible. Nowadays, of course, the big change was when your CD-ROM based technology come out there, and suddenly companies knew that they could just, all they had to do was instruct the laser to go to a certain track on the audio, because it was essentially an audio CD, and start playing music from that particular track. And so games like Wipeout, I mean, I remember hearing Wipeout and I was just like, that music is real music. That's not a computer doing an impression of music. That's what you used to get before. Like, soundtracks in computer games in the past would be an interpretation, and even like with the Amiga, even as good as the audio could be on that, you know, even on the 16-bit consoles like the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo, you could tell it wasn't the real audio. It was following the same tunes, but it was like synthesized, because, you know, it was the computer had a processor that was doing whatever it was doing behind the scenes to create this thing. But when I got my PlayStation, and it was like, wow, I remember playing Loaded, and that had music in some of the levels from Pot Will Eat Itself. When you load it up, it was like, God, I've got the album that this audio's off. Dos Dedos Mis Amigos, I think, was the name of the album. I can't remember now. But anyway, I had the actual album, and I was like, this is off the album. This isn't like an interpretation. This is like putting the audio CD in and playing it. But it's playing in time with the game. And it was the same with Wipeout. When Wipeout 2097 come out, and it's got music by The Prodigy, and it's got like Firestarter and stuff like that. You forget in this day and age where this stuff is just taken for granted, where game audio is every bit as good and every bit as important as movie soundtracks are. You forget that in actuality the concept of it is quite young compared to movies. I mean, movies had orchestral soundtracks going right the way back from the beginning, you know, sort of like cinema auditoriums would have an orchestra that would play the music, because obviously there was no audio on the actual movies. And when audio was added to the film, then you got the music in the film, and then, you know, you're talking, you just don't think about it. But with video games, that was a seismic shift. So and now, because of the size of storage and the way that speed can be accessed, all that audio is stored on a hard drive now. It doesn't even need to access the disc anymore. And it's crazy, because you just take it for granted. Sort of the last 20-25 years, we've kind of taken this for granted, that this is what the audio is going to be. And it's kind of funny to think that the idea of chip tunes is a real retro thing now. If a game comes out and somebody's created sort of a chip tune for it, that's considered to be very, very retro. Whereas, back in the day, that was your game audio. You didn't have anything else. So yeah, I mean, game audio is really, really important. I mean, I'm thinking of like a number of games now. I mean, 16-bit generation again. Rob Hopper did the music to Road Rash, and that was one of my favourite pieces of music on the Mega Drive. It was like a really rocking soundtrack. But again, it was limited by this audio processor within the Sega Mega Drive / Genesis, but it just sounded incredible. I mean, to this day, I know all of the music to that game. Each of the music pieces in the game is just burned into my skull because I played it so much. And I actually would play tracks in a certain order, so I would always have my favourite piece of music would be the last track I would race on. It's kind of weird. I sort of arranged the how I would race each of the courses in terms of how much I like the song, so I would save the best till last. And when I've gone back and played the game, some 20 odd years later, I still do the same thing. I still race in the same order as I did back then. It's kind of weird, but yeah. And like I say, coming into the modern age, I mean, the music for games like Assassin's Creed, I absolutely love, because there's so much effort put into them to be the music kind of influenced by the setting that the game's in, which sort of age of history that the game's in, but it also has a modern take on it as well. Assassin's Creed 2, I absolutely love the audio from that. It's funny, any of you that listen to Larry Herb's Xbox podcast, he used to take an excerpt from Assassin's Creed 2. That was the music that was the intro to his podcast. It was brilliant piece of music. I love the music to the Mass Effect games as well. Even like a lot of people don't like Mass Effect Andromeda, but the music in that game is astounding. It is brilliant. It really is good. You can just sit in the main menu and listen to that menu music like play through. It's like really epic. Has a really epic sci-fi going into the unknown feel to it. Almost like a pioneering sound to it in some respects. Like these are pioneers going into the Andromeda galaxy, and the soundtrack really reflects that. It's so much effort put into it, and even like a lot of games, like say the earlier Mass Effect games, the soundtrack for each of the chapters of the trilogy are very, very good. I mean, they just reflect the mood of each one. The Leaving Earth piece in Mass Effect 3, when Earth has been been devastated by the Reapers, that it's such a mournful piece. It's like a based around a piano piece. It's very simple but very effective, and it sets the mood, because just a simple piece of music sets the tone for the game on how you're going to be playing it afterwards. Like the magnitude of what you have to do is just conveyed in that simple piece, and having an excellent audio setup really enhances it. Like I say, I have heard this stuff through really good audio before today. I have a really good set of headphones that, although can't compete with an in-home theatre, they are really good. In fact, on some of my live streams, I always joke, say I'm going to have to turn this down, because the music and the sound effects are that loud in these headphones. I keep thinking I'm going to suffer permanent hearing. Well, I already have hearing loss from going to too many rock concerts down the years, but I know I'm going to seriously go deaf if I'm not careful. And also because you kind of start shouting, because I can't even hear my own voice. So I have to turn it down, and that's like, because the audio's really good in it. But yeah, I was going to say, like, Doom 2016 is another great soundtrack, because it sort of, there's like this weird, creepy, oppressive sound when you're exploring around, and then when the demons come in, it's like this heavy rock kind of industrial metal kicks in, as you're running around shooting things and punching them in the face and ripping their arms off and beating them to death with it. And it really gets the adrenaline going. It's perfect accompaniment. I mean, it'd be weird if you changed the audio and put something that wasn't like that. You almost wouldn't get that same frenzy type of gameplay thing going, where your adrenaline kicks in and it's like you got demons, God knows what else, diving at you from all angles, and you got this really heavy industrial sort of sound, almost a Nine Inch Nails type sound. There's another one again. Nine Inch Nails did the audio for Quake. I think they did the audio and they did the music for Quake. And what was interesting was, I had that on the PC, but I've still got it on PC, and I will not get rid of it, because even if you digitally download it now, if you've got the original disc like I have, you put that in, it will start playing the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack, because unless you actually download a separate audio file, shall we say, most of the time when you get the game either on Steam or GOG or wherever it's being sold, it doesn't have the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack, so I guess it's to do with licensing issues. But if you have the original disc, pop the disc in, off you go. It's great, and it really makes a difference. It adds to the game. I did play a version of it, and I think it was on the N64, and it didn't have the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack. It was either the N64 or the Sega Saturn, and it didn't have that soundtrack, and I didn't like it. It was like, no, this isn't right. You've got to have that Nine Inch Nails soundtrack playing. So audio is really important, and it's not just music, it's sound as well. You think about how sometimes in some games they get the absence of audio, and you're playing like a first-person survival horror. Quiet moments can be just as intense as, sort of a real intensive, overbearing piece of music, because it builds tension. And games now, the way they're made now, there's equal attention put to the audio elements of a game as there are to the graphical elements of a game, and it's really important because it makes a huge difference. It really does make a big difference. And the environmental audios, sometimes when I'm playing, if I'm live streaming an open world game or any game, I'll often comment on how you can hear so much in the environment that you don't always get when you're just playing it through normal speakers. And how directional it is as well can make a big difference. Playing Doom 3, I've been streaming a lot of that, and with headphones on, I played it with headphones on the PC years ago, but I kind of forgot just how much more intense that game is with headphones. So even though an in-home theatre gives you excellent sound, with headphones on it's more in your ears, it feels more personal. It's kind of weird to say, some games do benefit from that, and Doom 3 definitely does, because like I say, these headphones, you've got directional audio going with them, can make a big difference. And Doom 3, because it's more of an intense game, an intense experience, really does have that going for it. And I'm just having a look now, there's so many games, and so many of them have awesome soundtracks now. It's all, like I say, it's taken for granted, really. You don't realise that once upon a time, some games had soundtracks that really sucked. They were just like somebody was playing on a cheap little penny whistle or something, or clanging couple of objects together. That was your in-game audio. I mean, sit and think about it now. How many games have you played recently? And I'll throw this question back out there. How many games have you played recently where you thought, oh god, the sound in that game was rubbish, or the music in that game was rubbish? I mean, genuinely, when was the last time something was that bad it leapt at you and you thought, this is crap, this I'm going to have to turn this music off because it's an affront to my senses? I can't think of a single example, even if the game's been really bad. I can't think of ever an example where the soundtrack has repulsed me. The worst thing I would get is the fact that it's nondescript, or it's just pretty generic. But I can't remember the last time I actually heard game audio that made me reach for the volume control, not to turn it up, but to mute it. Like I say, I mean, that happened quite a lot. Any of you see my Chase HQ video, which was on the Commodore 64 and wants now crap in-game audio in a crap game as well? Listen to that, listen to the siren of the car and the sound of the tyres, and that is what I'm talking about. Like, that type of stuff wouldn't happen in a game made today, okay? Tyre screeching, sirens would be just taken from an audio library. Back then, somebody sat there and coded that, and somebody went, yeah, that's good. And it wasn't, it's awful. It makes you want to, well, I did try to get rid of the game, I did try to take it back and swap it, but the bastards in the shop wouldn't let me. So yeah, it was a great point there, because a lot of people talk about graphics, and a lot of people talk about various other elements within gaming, but one thing that I think they've nailed in nearly, I would say, every game I play, I can't think of a time when I've sat and listened to the audio in a game and thought, this is rubbish. I think that every game that you get these days, they've nailed the audio, pretty much nailed it. I'm sure there's people out there that can come up with examples of, oh well, I didn't like the audio in this, but I'm comparing it to years ago when the audio in a game was something that was very notable when it was bad. If it's bad these days, I think for most people it's just indifference. Like I say, you're not reaching for the volume. I mean, you can get games that have rubbish dialogue, that's kind of funny, stilted dialogue, but that's just the delivery of a voice actor. I'm talking about the actual audio design of a game, rather than a performance of somebody. And let's face it, a lot of the performances, especially in a lot of the big games today, and even in a lot of the smaller ones as well, it's outstanding. Like, going back to the mid-90s, when Resident Evil, when it come out, was hilarious. I mean, I love the voiceovers in that game, for the fact that they're so bad. It's great. And some of them were really poorly translated from Japanese, which sometimes added to the hilarity as well, because you just had entire conversations where at the end of it you were like, I haven't a clue what that all meant, but it was that bad it was good. But now you don't get that. I mean, okay, you might get the odd game, maybe indie game or something like that low budget game or something that is a bit wooden, shall we say, in the voiceover department. But for the most part, it's fantastic. I mean, the voice actors now they're on a different planet to where they used to be many years ago. This is a proper profession, and I'm really glad that they took action to try to get a fairer deal, because their delivery in games is really important. So I didn't want to let that go without talking about game audio and game setups, audio setups as well. I'm sure a lot of you out there invest as much money in your home theatres, whether it's a sound bar. I know some of you've got excellent sound bars out there. or whether it's, you know, full-blown 5.1, 6.1, whatever the hell it is, surround sounds. You put as much effort into that as you do to the television. As I say, I'm not really in a position to do it. And really loud sounds as well kind of make me feel a bit agitated, because of like certain hearing damage over the years. Sometimes it's like goes through me a bit. So, but anyway, that's that topic from Chazni. Thank you very much. That was a great start. And it was, you know, it was different. You know, it was a different thing. So I thought I'd kick off with it, because again, like I say, a lot of people don't really talk about game audio these days, and it's bloody fantastic. It's like, of all the things you can say about the games industry getting stuff wrong, game audio they've nailed. So yeah, that's that one. So the second topic I wanted to discuss actually came from Edmundo Studios. It's another person that frequently comments on my videos, so it's always, comments are always very much appreciated. And Edmundo Studios raised the question of the importance of emulation. Now, a few years ago I would have been very dismissive of emulation, as some people classify it as piracy. I must confess I did have my feet in that camp somewhat, but as time goes on you realise that the way that the game industry is going, and you also realise the way that things are, in the future emulation is going to be the only way that people ever get to experience games from the past. And simply because although companies do make an effort to bring back old technology, so like for example my missus bought me the SNES Mini, which is fantastic, and is the, I say SNES, sorry, some people don't like it when you say SNES, SNES or Super Nintendo Mini. It's fantastic, it's got loads of great games on there. I absolutely love it to death. There's the NES Mini. There's been attempts to resurrect the Mega Drive. I know that Sega are actually going to release a new Mega Drive collection for the PS4 and Xbox One, and probably the PC. I don't really know what... I think there's a few games different to the one they released the last generation. However, I did notice that Sonic and Knuckles is missing off the collection, and that's going to feature in with the things that I've got to say about the emulation side of things here. So there is some efforts, but I know there's a Commodore 64 Mini that's coming out, which I am interested in as being a Commodore 64 owner. It looks like it's like a mini Commodore 64 with a joystick attached, although I believe the keyboard is inoperable, but you can attach a USB keyboard to it. Kind of makes me wonder why you just didn't make a functioning Commodore 64 keyboard. I know it would have stuck the price up, but it would have made sense. If you're going to do a small version of it, at least some of the keys, shall we say, you got to do something with, in my view, because a lot of Commodore 64 games required a second button, or you know, which was the space bar or the enter key or one of the function keys or something. So although I'm looking forward to it, I'm also a bit skeptical. I had something I've got something very similar. I think it was the C64 DTV thing or something, which was just the joystick with the games built in, and it had a few buttons on the joystick I think was supposed to simulate space bars and F function keys and what have you. Anyway, yeah, that's all great. These things are great in terms of trying to keep this stuff alive, but the games that come out with it, that's it. I mean, it's locked off. I believe there are ways of flashing the ROMs in some of these things, but it invalidates the warranty. It's not what they were built for. So if something goes wrong, there's your 50, 60, 70, 80 pound device down the toilet. I don't know about the C64 Mini. I do remember reading they said that you could I guess must be via either a USB stick or an SD card or something. You could actually put downloaded ROMs into it, so you could play the games like that. I don't know if that's true, but in any event, if you just took these devices and used them as they were intended, they only have a very small number of games, and quite often they tend to be the same games over and over again in each iteration. And quite often the games that you really want to play, you don't get to play, because the license is issue with licenses. There's issues with certain companies that sit on their IP, EA, and won't let anybody do anything with them in terms of releasing them on compilations and stuff like that. And these games just get lost to the mists of time. And I've covered this before in some of my previous videos, especially when I've talked about games as art. It really does concern me that we are going into this sort of period now where there's a lot of talk about games being sold as a service, not as games anymore. And that means that stuff that you're playing now and could be playing in the near future is essentially going to go away. You're not even going to be able to play these games via any form of emulation, because it's almost going to be like, it's not vaporware, but it's almost going to be just something that vanishes into the ether when somebody switches a server off. There's going to be no way you can play that game offline. So if you're playing stuff like Destiny 2 and you spend your £100 or so or whatever in playing the full version of the game, in a few years time you're not going to be doing that. Somebody arbitrarily one day is going to walk in to the office at Activision, whether it's Bobby Kotick or somebody else, and he's going to say, shut that server off, we're done. And that's it, boom, gone. So if you've got Destiny 2, you could have spent £3,000 on DLC, it's all gone. So there's no way that in 20, 30, 40 years time anyone's going to be playing Destiny 2. You know, unless for some reason they re-release it. But nobody's going to be playing it. And this is a really, really sad thing for me. And it's the same with a lot of games that have been in the past. If you think about the games that you played when you were a kid, how many of them are actually available as some form of retro console, retro collection, available even on PC? I can think of 2 games, No One Lives Forever 1 or 2, I've actually got on CD-ROM or DVD-ROM, one or the other, for my PC, but everybody's crying out for it. GOG.com, Steam, everybody wants it, but it's held up with licensing issues. It's not going to happen anytime soon. In fact, a company had offered to do a remaster of it. I think Warner have the license. I think. I'm not sure. I know it was Fox Interactive that released it. But yeah, this is how much of a mess it all is. Because if Fox have still got it, then Disney are going to get it. So where do you draw the line with it? In any event, it's a fantastic first-person shooter. Brilliant game. Brilliant couple of games. You can't legitimately, unless you have the original discs, you can't legitimately download that anywhere. You can't pay money for it to play on your PC, and nothing. There are hundreds of Commodore 64 games that I've owned that you can't get anywhere. They're not on a compilation, they'll never be released on any kind of hardware thing, whatever. You'll never get them. And what then? So are we to just consign these games to the mists of time? Are we to just forget about them? What about if we want to play them? You know, the games industry's attitude has always been to be like, this generation is over, forget it all. And that attitude doesn't really dovetail very well for when you want to encourage people to go down the digital only path, which the games industry wants everybody to do. Because not only are you paying premium price for digital downloads, they cost more than it does to go and buy a game in the store, but you're faced with the inevitability that someday, if your hardware packs in, and let's face it, hardware does fail, you buy another console in 10 years time, say you've got your library on Xbox One, and Microsoft, I'm not saying they will, they almost certainly won't, but let's just say they decide to say, sod games, we're done with it, we're going to do something else, and they shut down Xbox Live, and they shut down the marketplace, and in 10 years time you buy a second-hand Xbox One, and you have to re-download your games because your other Xbox blew up, and you go to do it, they're not there, the service is gone, your games where you could access them before, the server has been formatted, and you know it's now being used for some weird version of Cortana or whatever personal assistant cloud server, and all your games are gone. Your profiles, your Xbox Live profile's gone, so you can't recover that. It's all gone. And what do you do? What do you do? That's it. It's game over. You've got a piece of hardware that's useless. So if you wanted to play, for example, I don't know, well, let's say Doom, the new Doom 2016, or you want to play Halo, or you want to play Gears of War, or you know, or if you know, let's throw some balance on there. On the PlayStation, you want to play Uncharted, and you've got these games and they were downloaded games. You can't. There's no way you can do it, because there's no way you can download them. You can't download them if the servers aren't there. And it's the same even if you've got physical discs now. A lot of them require online authentication for you to play. So for example, Gran Turismo Sport. It could be a fantastic game, but I'm never buying it, because I need to be connected online to save the offline single player. Can somebody tell me how that makes sense? I'm dying to know. But essentially, somebody comes along at Sony one day, says, what's this? Oh, it's GTA Sport. How many people are playing on it? Not many now. Right, turn it off. Boom, it's gone. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. It's gone. And what's left? Nothing. Your entire games library is going to be taken away from you. They hate the idea that you could, in 20 years' time, be playing a game you bought 20 years ago. They can't stand that idea. So this is why this kind of ties back in with the idea of emulation, because right now, with the hardware and the technology and where the gaming industry wants to go right now, you are not going to be able to play modern games on the systems that they're built for, even if you have the hardware. Like, I've got in my wardrobe, I've got a Sega Saturn, I've got a Sega Mega Drive, I've got an N64. I can play those games that I've had for those consoles for a few years now. I can play them. Okay, there's no... As long as that hardware works, I can play them. As long as I can find a working piece of hardware, I can play it. But eventually, the hardware is going to run out. Like everything else, it's going to get scarcer. It's going to get more difficult, because especially with optical based systems like Saturn's, original PlayStations, their motors wear out. They start to develop flaws just through wear and tear. Cartridge based systems tend to fare considerably better because there's no moving mechanical parts. although you have to be very careful, of course, that wear and tear on the cartridge slot and the cartridges themselves, they need to be well looked after. But it's important to realise that even go out and buying retro consoles, they've got a finite lifespan. At some point technology is going to move beyond, as we move away from optical media, which is what's slowly happening. It's not happening as quickly as some people would have you believe, but at some point in the future discs are going to go away, and therefore disc players are going to go away, and therefore the hardware, the actual components that you need to be able to repair and replace in old consoles, that's going to go away. You know, people are just simply not going to make it. You might have a few specialist outlets, but they're going to charge you the absolute earth. So retro gaming is going to become, at some point, very, very difficult to do without emulation. And Edmundo Studios made a really good point as well about digital distribution, and it's funny because I was looking at this a couple of weeks ago myself. I'm so glad that Nintendo is switching off the digital store for the Wii U next year, and they're very clear that you won't be able to re-download any of the games. It's going completely kaput, gone. Even if like I've got a working Wii, I have a Wii right now with digital games that I bought off there. If I accidentally delete them or my SD card malfunctions, I can't re-download those games. I'll have no way of doing it, and so the money that I've paid for those games is now only going to be as retainable value as long as that Wii remains functioning. Once that Wii falls over at some point in the future, then those games I've got on there will be gone. And some people might be saying, so what? What's the big deal? Right? Move on, play something else, play something new. Fine. Do you never watch old movies from when you were younger? Do you ever listen to music from when you were younger? Do you ever read books? Well, there's some people today, I'm pretty damn sure they don't read books, but you know, from years ago, do you have a favourite of something? Well, it's not nice when somebody comes along and tells you you kind of can't read, watch, listen or play something that you enjoyed years ago. It's not just about nostalgia. In terms of gaming, it's about heritage. Look at the movie industry. The movie industry doesn't have this problem. The music industry doesn't have this problem. The publishing industry for books and so on and so forth doesn't have this problem. But the games industry does. The games industry has a really big problem when it comes to dealing with how it treats its old games, its classic games, because it increasingly is becoming apparent that the games industry is wanting to move away from all of that stuff, and it wants these service-based titles that you're going to be like pumping in money like a cash machine, and that's going to be the subject of another video at some point in the future, because that is going to be a real big catastrophe when they try and go down that path, and I'll explain that in a later video. But yeah, the simple fact is that emulation could be the only way in the future we get to play classic games. It could be the only way that the old games are curated in any way. It could be the only way that we can actually look back at a game and think, wow, look at that, look how far we've come, or hey, isn't that great? Ain't this a great game to play still? You know, think about the number of games you pop in sometimes and it's an old creaky game and you think, God, this still plays well today. You won't have that without emulation. Then of course there is
That sounds
the elephant in the room, which of course is the legality of emulation, because strictly speaking, it ain't legal. You know, if you download a ROM for a game and play it on an emulator on your computer, you're breaking copyright laws. There is a supposed exception, I don't know how watertight it is, which says that if you actually own the game, you can play it on an emulator, so long as you actually own a physical copy of the game.
gave me the directions I needed.
I don't know how legitimate that is. I wouldn't like to find out. But at some point, legally or not, that is going to be the only way people are going to be able to play old games.
What next?
And at the moment, the way that things are, I don't see that changing. And I think that's really sad. I really do. I think that's... It saddens me because there's so many games that I would love to play again. You know, I would love... See, ideally, what people should do, and I've said this for a while, with regards to licenses, which is often one of the reasons why games end up disappearing into the mists of time, is because of license issues. You'll get your Sega Mega Drive collection, and I'll be pretty certain that Outrun won't be on there because Sega aren't licensed to use the likeness of Ferrari anymore. So they can't release a new Outrun game. They can't even release Outrun in a new format because they haven't got the agreement with Ferrari for the likeness of their cars in their games anymore. Which is why Outrun 2, was it Outrun 2 or Outrun Live or something, was pulled off the Xbox store a few years ago.
There is no honor among the fallen.
So,
Is that it?
I've said this, licenses should be permanent, tied to that particular game, not the company. So if a software house or developer or publisher gets the license to make a game, so if it's a Star Wars game, a Lord of the Rings game, if it's a game that's got licensed music in, the license for that particular game should be indefinite. It should be permanent. So that game can be re-released without any fear of licensing issues at any time, now or in the future. There needs to be, the games industry needs to look at this and say, this is what we need to do. Because here's another example, Burnout Paradise, which I found out today I'm going to get for my birthday, which I'm very happy about. That's got licensed music in it. Now, like Guns N' Roses' Paradise City plays when you start the game up, as you're going into the game, and it really sets the tone. It's great. But can you imagine if that license expired and they had to pull that out of the game and they put some generic song in there? It's not as good, right? I mean, that's part of the game. Hearing Paradise City play when you start the game up is part of what makes that game really good. I mean, it's a great game, but it's part of it. And to me, that should not ever be an issue, because that was licensed to Burnout Paradise. So as long as the game called Burnout Paradise, and it's that game, keeps coming out, then there's no issue with the licenses. If you made a whole new game called Burnout Paradise, well then, fair enough. You'd have to renegotiate the license for that, but a remaster doesn't count. Because a remaster, all it is improving the graphics and a few other things. It's still the same game. You know, people that have got Burnout Paradise, some people aren't going to buy it again. So it's not an entirely new game. I think that things need to be done. Steps need to be taken, because we've lost so many great games to the mists of time, and the industry needs to take a look at itself and say just how seriously do they want people to take them as an industry? Because if you are creating stuff that's here today, gone tomorrow, and there's no real comeback on stuff with it, then you're creating something that's superficial. And superficial things have no meaning. Excuse me. They have no meaning in time. If you think about movies, and those classic movies that came out even before I was born, I've watched a lot of them. I can't imagine never having seen the original King Kong when I was a kid. I can't imagine never having seen Christopher Lee's Dracula, which, was out before I was born. Excuse me. My voice is starting to go, so I'm going to wrap this up soon. All of these things, if I think I would never have seen them because they would have been lost for time. Classic sci-fi movies from the 60s, 50s, 60s and 70s, I would have missed. 2001, A Space Odyssey, I would have never seen that, with the attitude that the games industry has. I think that sometimes we tend to think of young people being superficial. I think it's the curse of when you get to middle age. And I don't agree with that. I think that young people will watch old stuff. Because we watched old stuff when we were kids. We didn't turn our nose up because it was old and looked a bit janky. So why would we think that a new generation would? I think we tend to take elements, we tend to take individuals and use them as a way of sort of judging an entire generation. And I think it's unfair. You discover things as you get older from the past. We've all lived it ourselves, so we know that's the truth. We gain an appreciation for stuff that was around before we were born, because it helps us understand where we come from, and it helps understand where things are going. I've got plenty of classic movies that I watched that was around 10, 15, 20, 30 years, even 40 years before I was born. And I love watching them. I kind of started to discover that stuff as I got into my late teens and then into my 20s, so interesting films and the history of films started to come along. I wanted to see the original, if they were remakes and what have you. And case in point, I love the 1953 version of War of the Worlds. Terrifying sci-fi movie. Scared the hell out of me when I was a kid. And I love it. That came out like somewhat 20 odd years before I was born. Nearly a quarter of a century before I was born. It didn't stop me liking it. There are kids today that watch the original Star Wars movies and love them. I've got nephews that love the original 3 Star Wars movies that was released 30 years before they were born, 35 years before they were born, even, who knows, it's just, you shouldn't judge people, you shouldn't write them off, and it's the same with games. Enough people, I think, are interested in playing old games. That's why these retro consoles come about. That's why they sell so well. You couldn't get an NES and a Super NES minis. You couldn't get them. So they must have been in demand, right? I know people were buying them up and selling them on eBay, but they were doing it because there was a market. If there was no market for it, they'd be losing money, so they wouldn't do it. Nintendo have had to react to actually redoing the NES run this summer because of demand. People still want it. This is why retro is important. It's right there. The evidence is there. There's a demand. And if the games industry is clever, rather than it pursuing simple revenue streams that are down the lines of let's be all about services, You've got an entire back catalogue, you've got an entire legacy and history to go back to and look at. Sort your licenses out and put some effort into it. If they don't want to do it as individual companies, then get somebody to do it. Get the industry come together, let the some governing body be formed, say, right, we're going to sort this out, we're going to monitor this, we're going to sort it out. Go back to these companies and say, you have the license for that, you have the license for that. And even if they just release the goddamn games exactly how they are, that will work on a modern system, fine. But that is the only alternative. It would take effort, it would take time, it would take investment. But if these companies care an iota about the heritage and where they come from, if they want to be considered as what they do is art, then they need to start preserving it. I suspect the rhetoric though that comes from a lot of them is, it's not art, it's a service, like car insurance, like any other here today, gone tomorrow crap. It's just fast food. There's no permanence to it, and I suspect so long as those attitudes prevail, nothing will happen. And then, sadly, we'll only be left with the option of emulation in the future to enjoy a lot of the classic games, because there won't be any other way of doing it. And if that gets shut down, then there's going to be absolutely no way. And the games industry will just be something that is a business, is a company without any history, any definable history, any chartable history. People won't be able to play old games. Just think about that for a minute, how sad that would be. Let's just see how sad it would be if suddenly Hollywood turned around tomorrow and said any film that's over 10 years old is going to be wiped out of history and no one will ever be able to see them again. Imagine if the music industry did that. Imagine if the publishing industry for books did that. Just condemned huge swaths of stuff to the dustbin of history, and no one in the future would ever be able to see it again. To me, that would be like a cultural apocalypse. And the games industry is sort of teetering very close to that, if it's not careful. So, I think I've covered about everything that I'm going to cover in this, because my voice is absolutely wrecked, because I've talked for nearly an hour non-stop. I hope that covered it well for you, Edmundo, and I hope Chazni, I covered well enough for you there, and kind of you've got out of it what you kind of was wanting me to cover. I'm sorry if in the audio side of things I don't have much technical knowledge. I'm afraid I have much technical knowledge in terms of setups and what have you. I just know what sounds good, and that's pretty much it. So I kind of wanted to go with more about the actual audio itself in games rather than how it's technically delivered, because I think I'm always a bit reluctant to talk about things I don't know a huge amount about. But certainly very good audio setups make a big difference. Anyway, that's it for this video. If any of you have got any questions or topics that you want me to cover in the next one, let me know in the comments section, and I'll endeavour to do what I can. Again, usual strictures, let's just keep it about games and, you know, stuff that relates to gaming. And yeah, nothing more to say really, other than thank you very much for watching. This has been quite a long ramble, so I hope you stick with it, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you get something out of it. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll be back with some other stuff very soon.